Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sober in the Sun. Thank you very much for joining me today, for taking some time out of coming inside from the sunshine. Unless of course you are sat by the river streaming this on your mobile phone. Good job on you. So, what I'm going to talk about today, I think probably I really ought to sort of say there's like a bit of a trigger warning. And so I'm going to show you a video fairly swiftly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about alcohol, and some people might find that triggering. The good news is, of course, the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about how to deal with those triggers. So anything that I might say that is a bit triggering, hopefully will be well balanced by a lot of really solid ways of managing those triggers and getting past them. So as you joined, I'm sure you noticed that the Zoom told you that I'm recording today. I am only recording my face, though. The way it's set up, it will only record the person speaking. So if you don't want to be recorded, don't say anything. And if you do want to ask a question and, unmute and jump in and ask a question, feel free to. And I will also take that as your permission to record your image and broadcast you. Obviously, if you don't want to, appear in the show, then just feel free to stick some questions in the chat and I will endeavor to deal with those. So, well, that's all of the kind of like the announcements out the way. If there is a fire alarm, that's ultimately your problem, because I'm not planning on having one here anyway. So let's get on with this. What I wanted to start with was by showing you this little video here. So let's see if I can share my screen and make it all work. Yeah, that's what I felt I needed to give you a bit of a trigger warning about. So yeah, that's obviously an advert for Irish cider, and unsurprisingly, what is it? It's good-looking people in the sun drinking alcohol. And that, I think, gets at the heart of what I want to really talk about today, which is this link between being out in the sun with your friends, who are obviously all good looking, and having a drink. And what I wanted to sort of like get at is, this question: is there really genuinely a link between sunshine and alcohol? Should there be a link between sunshine and alcohol? Is that advert the truth, or is it actually just marketing? More specifically, what I'd like you to think about just for a second is, what feelings does that advert evoke? In fact, I'm going to play it again for you, and I want you to just think about what kind of feelings you're getting when you're seeing that advert. That's my question. What feelings does that advert evoke? What are we talking about? We envy? Anybody getting a bit of envy? Maybe a bit of desire, what we could even call lust, perhaps. Certainly those kind of emotions whereby you're kind of wanting to be in that situation. I think, if I'm getting it right, that's certainly what I'm feeling. I wonder if that's what you're feeling as well. But the overarching one, I think, I don't know, maybe you're getting it as well: thirst. I think that advert is specifically designed to make you thirsty. Which then begs the question, does alcohol actually quench your thirst? Now, we could answer that in a biological sense. Does it make you less thirsty? Or we could answer that sort of more from the point of view of desire. You could ask yourself the question, what are they actually talking about? What are they actually focusing on? Are they focusing on wanting something, or are they focusing on liking something? Because there's a bit of a subtle difference. Is it wanting or is it liking? Where does that thirst come from? Is it the nice taste, or is it almost needing something? So just to get into that in a little bit more detail, what I'd like you to do is think about a situation where you, in the past, may have gone for a drink. One of those kind of idealized situations. Or at least in my experience, I've found that people regularly have them. They often revolve around a very similar situation to that advert. The sun is shining, you're sitting around outside with some friends having a drink. Of course, that could be a pub garden. That could be a pavement cafe in a holiday destination. That could be a nice restaurant in a harbour somewhere. Or it could just be a barbecue with your friends, or, just sitting around by the river, somewhere with a nice view. But what I want you to do is really think about that situation. Put yourself in that situation for a moment. And then ask yourself whether in that situation, if you were there and not able to drink alcohol, would you feel uncomfortable? And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, would you imagine that, there is a situation like that where you might feel uncomfortable, or at least that people would feel uncomfortable? I'm sure you can stretch your imagination to that one, can't you? And think it begs the question, like, why do you feel uncomfortable in that situation? Now, for me, I don't feel uncomfortable in situations like that. In fact, at the weekend, I was at what it was a school fete. It was actually a school fete, but it felt very much like a village fete, which was weird because it was in the centre of London. It's like this little cosmos of villagified English life, right, literally right in the centre of London. Very weird, but the sun was shining. The people I was with, they were mostly standing around, having a beer, chatting away, and that's one of those situations. Sun's shining, you're with your friends, having a drink. I did not feel at all uncomfortable in that situation. I was absolutely happy. I was enjoying myself. So the answer for me, how you get to those situations and be comfortable and enjoy them, it's all to do with getting your head in the right place, or mindset, if you want to be, a bit more kind of fancy about it. And actually, part of that, a big part of that, is recognizing the difference between what is the truth of the situation and what is the marketing. So for me, that all really comes down to beliefs. And your beliefs dictate the amount you drink. That's not my belief, that's the science. There's a lot of research that goes into these things called alcohol expectancies. And the higher you have in terms of expectations around alcohol, the more you tend to drink. So beliefs are absolutely at the heart of it. And for me, coming out the other side, changing my beliefs was very, very important. Just to hammer home the point about how your beliefs underpin the way you feel, the way you think, and the way you act, I want to give you an example of the England football team. I don't know, maybe it's too close for some of you, but you've had a few days to get over it. And you've got to ask yourself, so like so many people watched England play in the Euros against Spain on Sunday, a couple of days ago. And why did so many people do that? Why did they stay up late on a Sunday night celebrating? Why did they maybe go into work late on Monday morning? Why did they, if they did go into work, probably phone it in, probably do very, very little work? Why did so many people do that? I think it comes down to belief. It comes down to this very simple belief that football is important, that it matters whether England won that match or not. That's the belief that set up the action. And that's the belief that set up the feelings. The people who are feeling bad because England lost, their lives haven't really changed. No big impact had happened. It was simply because of that belief. Now, just to hammer home the point, you can contrast that with another sporting event that's coming up fairly soon. the final of the water polo in the Olympics. Now, I would argue that most people don't believe that water polo is particularly important. But when you get down to it, water polo is just a bunch of people trying to get a ball into the back of a net. And football is just a bunch of people trying to get a ball into the back of the net. They're very, very similar things, but because we believe one of them is important, we stay up late, watch it, and go to work feeling terrible the next day. Because one of them we don't believe is important, we didn't even know it was happening. In fact, I would be surprised if the average person could tell you who won the water polo final 4 years ago. So absolutely, our beliefs dictate not simply the way we act, but the way we feel and the way we think as well. So what I want to do is help you get into some of the beliefs that you have around alcohol that have come from places like that Magners advert. You know, this belief, particularly that a sunny day is not a sunny day without a beer. And to do that, I want to explain to you the system that I use to help people to change their beliefs. I like to call it the belief disposal system. I like to call it that because I give everything this sort of slightly macho name. Basically, my parents didn't buy me the Action Man helicopter when I was a kid. And, you know, as a result, I have to give everything this sort of slightly stupid macho name. So I called it the belief disposal system. So let's get into it. What do you actually do to, you know, dispose of a few beliefs? Well, the thing about our beliefs is they sit underneath our feelings, they sit underneath our thoughts, they sit underneath our actions, but we never actually question them. We never really get into, you know, why do we believe these things? What do we feel about them? And that's what the belief disposal system is all about. So the first thing that you've got to do is identify what your beliefs are. You've got to actually, you know, make them solid, make them real, actually kind of pin them down a little bit. So much of them they sit in your unconscious, and this is about trying to make them conscious. And when we get to the end of this particular group of slides, I'm going to go into something that will really help you do that as well. But the first step is always to identify them and to figure out what they are, because you can't change something that you are not aware of. So the second thing is to examine them. Now, you can get quite complicated in the way that you examine them, but I would just encourage people to ask two very simple questions. The first is it true? You know, so let's look at that Magners advert and generally the belief about how a sunny afternoon is made better by drinking alcohol. You know, is it true? If you go and buy some Magners, will your afternoon suddenly look like that? Will you be sat across from that very good-looking girl or good-looking guy, depending on you know what melts your butter? Is that going to happen? Obviously not. And then you can get into a little bit deeper. You know, all right, you're still going to be hanging around with your friends, but are you going to have this wonderful afternoon? You could just look at your previous experience. You could ask yourself whether, you know, the majority of the time you've had this wonderful experience, or whether the majority of the time actually you drank a little bit much and you start to feel a bit uncomfortable because you were dehydrated, you were too hot. You know, you had an argument with your friends. You know, you ended up falling asleep somewhere you shouldn't. You know, you can ask yourself, how real are those adverts? Does that situation really play out? So you can start off by asking whether your belief is true. Does drinking alcohol actually enhance, you know, a sunny afternoon? That's the first thing. The second thing you can ask is it effective? Is it actually helping you? Is it helping you get to be the person you want to be? Is it moving you closer to your goals? You know, I don't know what your goals are, of course, but I can't imagine wasting the afternoon drinking beer in the pub is going to get you closer to too many of them, unless, of course, your main aim is to build some sort of beer belly. So that's the basic process of examining them. Ask whether they're true or not, and then ask whether they're serving you, whether they're moving you forward. And once you've done that, you get to the point where, wow, you just destroy them. I mean, if you believe something that isn't true and it's not actually helping you live the life you want to live, why on earth would you continue to believe it? That's actually the easy bit. I mean, once you've done the identification and the examination, they tend to just kind of drop off on their own. So just for a second, I want to really get into that idea of the pub garden, because it's so common, and it's something that I hear all of the time. Yeah, oh yeah, well, the best drinks. I'm sat round with my friends in the pub garden having a beer. It just makes everything a lot better. So let's examine that and see whether that statement is actually true. So what is it that you actually enjoy when you're sat around in the pub garden? Uh, I'm going to assume you're doing it after work rather than before work. You're probably talking about Friday, so it might even be at the end of the week. It's certainly going to be at the end of the day. So you've finished working for the day, possibly the week. So that is a fundamentally relaxing place to be in, isn't it? That's nice. That's positive. That's good. You're somewhere pleasant. The weather is nice. You've got maybe a nice view of a river or some trees or something like that, a bit of nature. So where you are is fundamentally quite nice, and the weather is quite nice. This again is pleasant. This is relaxing. This is going to contribute to you having a good time. And you're sat around with your friends. And of course, your friends are awesome, right? Your friends are the most interesting, beautiful, wonderful people in the world. Of course they are. So you're having a nice conversation with people who are great. Fantastic. So you're relaxed, you're somewhere nice, you're talking to nice people. That is fundamentally enjoyable. Now, what you've got to ask yourself is, how does the alcohol add to that? Or you could look at it in another way. If I'm sat there, I've got no desire to drink alcohol at all. How would my life be improved if I had an alcohol? If I had a beer? You might say, oh well, beer tastes nice. All right, fine. I'll go and get an alcohol-free beer. So I'm sat there with my alcohol-free beer. What is it that actually putting some alcohol into that beer would offer to me? Because actually, if you look at the sort of the effects of alcohol, one of the first ones is it makes you warmer. It actually gets you hotter. Now, the way it affects your vascular system. So you're already probably a bit too hot because it's sunny. So I'm not sure that's necessarily going to help. Yeah, you might feel slightly more relaxed on the first beer, but the second and the third beer, they're not going to increase your relaxation. They're actually just going to affect things like your concentration and your balance and your willpower and your focus in terms of your eyes and all of that kind of stuff, which is why, of course, you don't drive after you've had a drink. So for me, that doesn't sound like actually any of that is going to enhance that situation. For me, what that sounds like is you're in a nice situation, something that you're fundamentally enjoying, and then you have a drink. And then you say that you're enjoying the drink, but you're not. You're enjoying the situation. You just happen to also be drinking at the same time. And I think once you've got to that sort of level of depth with your beliefs, then you can really start to change the way you think and act and feel around alcohol. But it always absolutely definitely starts with the beliefs. So let's just have a look at some of the ones that I see all of the time, the very common beliefs. I'm just going to kind of run through these. There's a lot of depth in all of them, but celebration. Loads of people believe that alcohol is, the only way to celebrate. You can't celebrate without it. Identity. I've met a lot of people who believe that they are drinkers. That is fundamental to who they are. Socializing. I know that doesn't even need mentioning. A lot of people believe after a while that they just get into the habit of drinking. A lot of people think that it helps them to deal with stress. That one's huge. Relaxation, also similar sort of thing. For some people, it's one of the things that they do when they're sad. For others, it's something that stimulates them and helps them to become more outgoing and active. For some people, they believe it's the only way that they can meet people. For other people, it's very much tied up with sex. Although now I think about the way I just said that, tied up and sex in the same sentence anyway. So for some people, they consider it a treat. They do it's something that they do as almost a form of self-care. For some people, it's a form of rebellion. Can be something that people do when they're bored. You can go massively into business and alcohol. So whether you have to drink at networking events, or you have to drink with the clients, or whether you think your chances of promotion would be harmed if you weren't drinking with the boss. That's a particularly big one. Creativity, again, could talk for hours about alcohol and creativity. It's a huge subject. And then also routine. So those are the kind of areas that, I think you need to start to get to grips with and start to, identify the beliefs that you have around those areas, examine them, ask whether they're true, ask whether they're serving you. And if they're not, pack them full of Semtex and blow them to smithereens. So basically, my suggestion would be take a screenshot, take a snap of that, take a photo of that, because writing it down is too much. And if I get rid of the slide too quickly, just drop me a line. I'll send it over to you. But that is a great starting point about getting to grips with your beliefs around alcohol. So take a screenshot, quick, take a snap, photo, 3, 2, 1. Right, it's gone. Now, how are you actually going to go through the process of identifying and examining those beliefs? Yes, you can do it on your own. You could do it in the shower if you're particularly reflective. You could do it whilst you're walking the dog. That is possible, not necessarily the best way for a lot of people to do it. Some people find journaling, writing those questions down and answering them on paper is a better way to help them think through and clear out their thoughts. Journaling is great because, all it costs is paper and pencil, which you've probably got lying around anyway. For other people, it will be much easier with a friend. If you've got one of those friends who's really good at listening and doesn't just jump in with their own experience after, you've been talking for 30 seconds, like genuinely be nice to that person, keep them around, spend some time. If they're happy to going through all of those kind of things. If you don't have a friend like that, you can look for a sober buddy. Jump on any of the social medias. There's lots of sober groups out there. You can find a buddy. If you've got an existing coach or mentor or a priest or a sponsor or somebody like that in your life who is very good at helping you get to grips with self-limiting beliefs, then they might well be the right person to do that as well. So that's the kind of whole piece around beliefs. You have a lot of beliefs around alcohol. Even people who've stopped drinking, even people who've never drunk, have got a lot of beliefs around alcohol, and they do drive your actions, your thoughts, and your feelings. So getting to grips with them, I always think, is the best place to start. And that begins by identifying them, examining them, and getting rid of all of the ones that aren't serving you. So once you've dealt with your beliefs, I think the thing that comes next is your thoughts. And just to sort of illustrate how your thoughts can be, get into a groove, I wanted to share this photo with you. So if you Netflix and you've watched the new live action version of The Last Airbender, you will definitely recognize this person. It's the main character from The Last Airbender, which I quite enjoyed, sort of, although this is not really a recommendation for you because now I am going to basically ruin it for you. It's no spoilers or anything. You notice that little kid's got an arrow tattooed on his forehead, right? When I was watching the first episode, I sort of looked at that tattoo and I went, has that moved from the last scene? Is that further up his forehead than it was in the last scene? And then I spent the rest of the episode trying to work out where the arrow was in relation to his eyebrows. And of course, I watched the other 7 episodes, and I just, every time he was on screen, I was concentrating more on the arrow and the eyebrows than I was on the actual plot. Was that distracting? Yeah, just a little bit. Did that kind of get in the way of my enjoyment of the show? Quite possibly. If you are now thinking all that, I'm familiar with the cartoon of The Last Airbender. I'd now like to watch the live action version. My final question for you is, have I just spoilt it for you? Will you just spend the whole time looking at where that tattoo is on his forehead? Who knows? But sadly, probably yes. Now, the reason why, like, I wanted to just kind of like start with that is because our minds, they like grooves. They like to go down these like nice, well-worn tracks, don't they? And I got my mind into one of those grooves, didn't I? I started thinking about that tattoo, and then every time I saw it, I just thought about it more and more and more. And I made that pathway in my mind bigger and bigger and bigger. So it just became the easiest thing to walk down. And I have no doubt at all that when the next season comes out and I start watching it again, I'll sit down, and after 30 seconds, that'll be all I can think of. So our minds do like grooves. We do like those well-worn tracks. You start thinking in one direction, you do tend to keep thinking in that direction. And alcohol is the great creator of grooves in our mind. I mean, the ultimate example is, of course, sunshine. We start to think early on, we see the adverts, we start to start to associate sunny weather, drinking outside. That groove starts to get formed, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it gets bigger, to the point where we can't almost go outside in the sunshine without thinking about having a beer. So yeah, alcohol creates grooves. I mean, you can go into all of the neurology and the neurotransmitters and all of that kind of stuff of it, but just for today, alcohol is great at creating these grooves in your mind. Now, can you change them? Okay, sort of. I mean, you can't change the sunshine. Oh, you probably can change the sunshine. I mean, that would be very easy. Just move to the UK. But in general, you can't change the weather. You get the weather that you get. And certainly when you're, in your early sobriety, when you're really trying to get a handle on these things, you can't change the fact that your mind is going to go down those grooves. That you can't change. So you can't change the triggers, and you can't change your initial reaction, but you can change your reaction to it. So that's what I kind of want to get at today. You can't change the physical, environmental, social things that create these little triggers. You probably can't initially change the actual first craving that you have, but you can change your reaction to it. So let me just explain that a little bit more clearly with a few pictures. So this is what I like to call the tactical change system. Again, I have to give it a slightly macho name because I'm not really that macho. And it is a way of managing the thoughts around the triggers. Like I say, you can't change the actual triggers. So for the moment, we will represent the trigger simply with a couple of bottles of beer. But the triggers can come from almost anywhere. A lot of them are going to be associated with places. So you go certain places where you've done a lot of drinking, your brain is going to say, oh, let's have a beer. Certain people, if you've done a lot of drinking with certain people, your brain is going to say, oh, let's have a beer when you see them. But ultimately, the sunshine is a trigger for a lot of people because they associate these two things because they've watched too many Magners adverts. So you have the triggers; those are going to happen, and they will continue to happen. I mean, to an extent, you can avoid them, but you can't avoid all of them because some of them are just plain surreal. So I remember, when I was fairly early on in my recovery journey, like a couple of weeks into it, I was walking down the road, and all of a sudden, I just felt like drinking some wine, and I couldn't get it. It really confused me, and so I spent a lot of time. I got into a particular groove with that thought, and I actually spent quite a lot of time trying to work out what it was that had made me want a drink because I was just walking down the road. It was just like a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't see anyone. I wouldn't walk past the pub, but eventually it dawned on me. I'd walked past the bank. Okay, Duncan, the bank? Seriously? Yeah. What my mind basically did was I walked past the bank the day, well, just before that, earlier that day, I'd been having a conversation with somebody about them wanting a mortgage. So the bank made me think of the mortgage. The mortgage made me think of the flat that I used to live in. And I used to drink quite a lot of wine in that flat. So this kind of like very bizarre series of connections got me to the point whereby my brain just said to me, "Oh, let's have a drink." She, like basically, unless you hide under the duvet, you can't change the triggers. You know, the triggers are going to be there. You've got to find a way of managing them. So you know, you walk past the bank, for some bizarre reason your brain says, let's have a drink. What do? Well, that's the bit that you can change. What comes next is the bit that you're in charge of. There are two things that people do that don't really help. One is sort of tell themselves that they can't have a drink, or I don't drink anymore, which generally just makes you unhappy. It makes you, you know, yeah, it just, you're telling yourself you can't do something. It's just unpleasant, makes you a bit unhappy. And what do when you're unhappy? You probably want to drink even more. So you end up in a bit of a cycle and it ends up being quite annoying. So don't do that. The other thing is, of course, having a drink. That is a very bad idea as well. So what are you going to do? What what is the alternative? Well, you just shout real men quit. Okay. Duncan, why do I shout real men quit? Oh, it's just good advertising for my book, isn't it? No. So, real men quit in this sense is, you know, an example of a mantra. And what we are trying to do is disrupt the thoughts. Now, not everybody likes the idea of mantras. If that word doesn't really appeal to you, mantra simply means to transport the mind. And that is all we are trying to do. We are trying to get the mind into a different groove. We're trying to get you walking down a different path. I'm going to go into exactly why real men quit. You know, is such a useful mantra, but effectively, it's quite positive. That's what you want. You want to say to yourself something quite positive, because the alternative, saying you can't have a drink, you mustn't drink, you don't drink, is negative. And people in general will do things that are positive rather than things that are negative. So we're trying to keep it positive, which is why after you have shouted, look, all right, you don't have to shout it. You can just think it. That's why it's in a thought bubble, not in a speech bubble. So you think your mantra and then you smile. Now, I'm sure you know that when you smile, whether you're happy or not, it puts all of those happy chemicals into your head. So it just reinforces that positivity. And that in itself can create, you know, a bit of reinforcement. Your brain then starts looking out for the triggers, not as an excuse to drink, but as an excuse to shout real men quit and smile, because that then becomes quite an enjoyable thing. And what you've done is you've taken your brain from one groove, you've put it into another groove. You just walk off and you then go about your day. So that is the tactical change system in its simplest, purest form. You have a trigger, you have an action, and then you have a celebration. TAC, trigger, action, celebration. In this sense, the action is you know, thinking or shouting a mantra to yourself. So that's the tactical change system. Now, like I say, I like Real Men Quit, and I'm going to go into particularly why I like it. But of course, you don't have to use that. There are lots and lots of other versions. You probably actually already have spinning around in your head a phrase that you like using. That's what I tend to find when I work with people. When we sort of try and find something that's meaningful for them, they just kind of like have a bit of a moment. Like one of my coaches the other day said, "Oh yeah, a phrase that really resonates with me is I haven't come this far just to come this far." And I was like, "That's a great phrase," and it's her phrase, you know, and it makes sense to her, and that's why she used that as her mantra. I had another person who liked free at last, free at last, praise the Lord, we're free at last. I always get it wrong. It's a Martin Luther King quote, but I think if you can remember it, it's quite inspirational. So there are lots of different things. It's just the important thing is finding a mantra that works for you, and then learning it when it is easy, and then you can use it when it is hard. So I spent 10 years in the fire service, and for a while, I never quite understood why they were so obsessed with making us practice putting up the 13.5 meter ladder. It was just a pain, and just takes four people. You got to be coordinated, and then we just did it to death. We did it so many times, and then of course I had to actually put it up at an incident, and because I had put it up so many times, despite the fact that it was raining, it was the middle of the night, I was tired, and I was somewhat stressed because there were more important things going on than thinking about where to put my feet whilst I'm putting up the ladder. Even in that situation, we threw that ladder up perfectly, very, very quickly, no problems. And that's what it's all about. Train when it's easy so you can perform when it's hard. And how do you do that with your mantras? Well, let's get back into it. So the first thing you've got to do is create a decent mantra. So there are two things that generally go into it. So identity and celebration. So I mean, I suppose the daddy of them all comes from a guy called Alan Carr, not comedian, the world-renowned addiction expert who wrote The Easy Way to Stop Smoking over 40 years ago now, has helped millions of people to stop smoking by repeating the phrase, "Yippee, I'm a non-smoker." Although, to be honest with you, I don't think kids say yippee anymore. To be fair, I've got no idea what kids actually say these days, but I'm pretty confident it's not yippee. Anywho's, the thing about that phrase is it just drips identity. I am a non-smoker. It's not that I don't smoke or I don't want to smoke or I can't smoke. It is that I am a non-smoker. So that's the identity piece. The yippee bit, that is the celebration. And as I said earlier, we do things that make us feel good. So if you can add that celebration into it, it will make you feel good, and that's important. Now, the identity thing, it doesn't actually have to be as specific and as kind of like obvious as I'm a non-smoker. That does work, but if it makes sense to you and it helps you to reaffirm who you want to be, then it is fundamentally, getting at your identity. And actually, these two things were something that was pulled up by BJ Fogg, who is a fairly famous behavior change expert. If you haven't heard of him, you've probably heard of a couple of his students. They started this small photo sharing app called Instagram. So, it's a fairly influential guy. And again, for him, at the heart of behavior change is identity and celebration. So once you've got your identity and celebration, build it into that mantra. And then how are you going to kind of learn to do it when it's easy? So I figure that most people drink something first thing in the morning. If you don't, like at the very least, you need some water. Like seriously, dude. I figure most people actually drink coffee. I'm sitting on I'm not sitting on the fence there. No, I'm picking my side there. I'm going coffee over tea. Sorry if that offends you. If you do drink tea, you can just drink tea in the morning. But what I like people to do is, that first drink, whether it's coffee, whether it's orange juice, whether it's Coke, tea, cold filtered yak's milk, whatever, that's going to happen every morning. You're going to do it the same place, same time, same environment. Everything's the same. So it's very controllable. So it is in itself a trigger. And what you want to do is you want to take that and use that to help you learn your mantra or learn to use your mantra. So I encourage people to be like ludicrously specific, not like, oh, I'll do it when I have my first coffee, like exactly when are you going to do it? I like to get them to tie it to a sight or a sound or a smell or a feeling. So, for example, if you've got an espresso machine, the noise that it makes when you push the button, that's a great one because it kind of triggers you it's a more of a visceral experience, isn't it? So that's going to remind you. Maybe if you do, like an energy drink first thing in the morning, when you crack the top of the can, that's got that noise to it. So that's a good signal. Or the noise pouring the orange juice into the glass. Again, that's got the visual and the auditory element. Or if you genuinely do drink yak's milk every morning, as you're squeezing the others of the yak, that would be a good one, wouldn't it? So pick a very specific point in the day when you are in the morning, when you're having that first drink, and then shout your mantra. Once you get to that point, shout your mantra. All right, you don't have to shout it. You can just think it to yourself. And then, of course, after that, you've got a smile, haven't you? And by doing that, you will build a habit. Every day you will start to say that mantra to yourself. And that does two things. I mean, one, I think it helps people to realize that they've got a bit more control over their thoughts than maybe they anticipated. Also helps you to realize that actually you are capable of change. But most of all, what it does is it teaches you to use that mantra in a nice, easy, safe situation. And once you start to get good at it, using it in that situation, you can start to use it in other situations where they might be more pressurized. So when you might be in a bar full of people and you're getting a bit jostled and go on, have a drink kind of thing, then you can use it in the difficult situations. So it's like learning to put that ladder up. You've got to spend the time on the drill yard just doing the ladder, do the ladder, do the ladder, do the ladder, because when you really need it, then you'll be able to do it. So that's the kind of the thought management piece. Just remember, there will always be triggers. You can't change the triggers. What you can change is the action that you take. And mantras are a fantastic way of moving your mind from one groove into a new groove. But whatever you do, just don't forget to celebrate it. It's so important to enjoy it, because if you enjoy it, you'll keep doing it. Okay, so I just want to talk about other people for a second. And to do that, I'm going to queue up my next video. Possibly, I turn off my own video. I do know how to use Zoom, honest. All right, there we go. Let's have a look at this one then. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting definition of the best bank in the world. The people running it drink all day. It's like okay. Anywho, so I mean let's think about that advert for a second. Did the word no appear in that advert? Was anything denied to Dave, the guy going into the bank? Was anything denied to him? And actually, if we take a step back, what is that advert really selling? In terms of the idea of permission. Was he given complete permission to do pretty much whatever he wanted to? And then you've got to kind of take another step back and say, what is the message there? The message for my money, it's just say yes, isn't it? And I think you can't entirely blame Carlsberg, but that is one of the things the advertising industry in general and the alcohol industry in specifically have been trying to do for years is to make it easy for us to just say yes. The assumed response is yes. In fact, the dominant culture is, of course, to drink alcohol. So the assumed response is yes, of course you are going to drink alcohol, which is not so great once you decide you're not going to do it. Because actually, by saying no, you're not simply saying no to a drink, you're saying no to the dominant culture. You're saying no to everything that everybody believes. And that can be a little bit tricky. Now, I think to really understand how to say no to somebody, you need to understand that there are two parts to it. The first part is before you can say no to anybody else, you have to learn to say no to yourself. And of course, that's probably most of the battle, if I'm honest. The good news is, how do you learn to say no to yourself? Well, you get to grips with your beliefs, you remove the ones that aren't serving you and aren't true, and then you learn to manage your thoughts. And that goes an incredibly long way to helping you say no to yourself. Of course, once you've done that, you aren't all the way there yet. You do need to learn to say no to other people. So, how are you going to do that? Well, I think it helps to understand, where other people are coming from, to understand that Carlsberg advert is, it's completely unsurprising to most people. That level of permission. I mean, I think, not wishing to digress too much, but straight white guys, we are just quite used to hearing the word yes, aren't we? And that really is the dominant culture, isn't it? And you got to think that people sit in that culture and they are expecting you to say yes. So once you've realized that actually you're pushing against quite a lot of stuff, you're pushing against a lot of beliefs, you're pushing against a lot of feelings, to realize that gives you an idea, I think, of, well, perhaps the reason why it can be a struggle, why it can be difficult. So with that in mind, what do you actually do? Well, honestly, I had a bit of a realization last year when I was at a wedding. I went to the bar and I got my wife a gin and tonic because my wife does drink very, very occasionally, not more than once a week, and never more than one drink at a time. But no, one drink a day, not like she's got one in either hand. Anyway, she doesn't drink very much, and she had a gin and tonic, and I bought the gin and tonic, and I always drink sparkling water because I watched a lot of Perrier adverts when I was a kid, and I think that's kind of lodged in my brain. I think I believe sparkling water is quite sophisticated. Anywho, so I got my sparkling water and I got her gin and tonic. And as I was walking back, I realised that they looked exactly the same. I mean, they didn't, of course, because the bartender put the gin and tonic in a fancy glass and he put a strawberry in it and he put a straw in it and he put a cocktail umbrella in it. He didn't put a cocktail umbrella in it, but you get the message. He kind of like he pimped it because he had to justify charging me £8.50 or whatever it was. Whereas the sparkling water, he just put in a straight glass. So what I did the next time when I went up to the bar was I asked him if he could put my sparkling water into one of those gin and tonic glasses. And he went, yeah, of course. I even chucked in a strawberry and a little straw and a cocktail umbrella. And I wandered round and, like my wife was actually a little bit surprised when I came back from the bar. She thought I was drinking gin and tonic. And at that point, it's like it's 8.5 years since I last had a drink and she was doing a double take. So I think one thing that we can do is we can hide ourselves a little bit by making it look like we are drinking alcohol. And there are a lot of ways of faking that. My favorite is, just drinking fizzy water and asking them to stick it in a fancy glass. Well, works every time. But, obviously there is a lot more alcohol-free drinks out there. And, I could do an entire hour on alcohol-free drinks. I know they're a bit of a wedge issue for some people. Some people like them, some people don't like them. But having something that looks alcoholic means people don't ask you why you're not drinking, which makes it easier. I mean, rather than kind of learning to manage a difficult situation, the best thing to do is, of course, to avoid it in the first place. So if you can do that sneak drink thing, I think it is quite good. But some people get a little bit kind of funny about that. They go, well, it's not very honest, Duncan, and I spent 20 years being dishonest when I was drinking, and I want my sobriety to be honest. And I do totally understand and respect that. You know, I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't there, between being honest about the important things and just generally making your life easier. So my number one tip is just get yourself something that looks like it's alcoholic, and then you have a lot less problems at events like that. Now the second thing is, of course, that's not going to work all of the time. Some of the time people are going to ask you if you want to drink, and you're going to have to say no, you don't want to drink, and that's going to push back against everything that they believe, everything they feel. I think it's also important to note at this point that 72% of people that drink want to drink less. Now, what that statistic says to me is that there are a lot of people out there who know that they are drinking too much, and they don't always react well to being shown up. They want to be drinking less, and you're drinking less. And that makes them feel bad because they perceive it as them looking bad. Of course, nobody notices, but our minds don't entirely work like that. So I think you've got to start from this point of view of understanding the other person's ego. And by not drinking, you are quite likely to be running up against their ego. You're just saying you don't want to drink, but they're interpreting it as you questioning their identity, their worldview, their ability to live their life. So once you understand that, I think it does make things a little bit easier. And that's why what I often say these days, because, generally I'm quite confrontational when I want to be, but I don't always want to be confrontational. And when I just want an easy life and I want things to be smooth, I use this phrase, which I really, really like. And it is when people say, would you like a drink? I say, no, I'm not drinking at the moment, and it seems to be working out for me. And I get very little pushback from that, from people that I don't know. They normally just go, oh, okay. And I think it works for two reasons. Because one, you're saying, I'm not drinking at the moment. Now, I know I am never, ever going to drink again. It's like I am as committed as anything to never, ever drink alcohol. But I always say I'm not drinking at the moment. Why? Because it's less threatening. It's less aggressive. If I went, I don't drink and I'm never going to drink, that's pushing the buttons. That's going up against their ego. So I always say I'm not drinking at the moment because it kind of minimizes it. And I think, it's important to realize, again, with the caveat about honesty, and I know that for some people it is a really, really big thing, but for me, I just think it's easier to say something that I know they'll interpret better than to be ruthlessly and often quite harshly honest. Like I say, I can be quite confrontational when I want to be, but sometimes it pays not to be at people's weddings and stuff. You don't want to start a fight, do you? No, those days are gone, my friend. Anyway, so that kind of like not being so confrontational, that's the I'm not drinking at the moment. And then it seems to be working out for me. Again, you're kind of hedging your bets. You're not like being very strong about the way you're saying it. It seems to be working out for me. It's not a big thing. Whereas I think a lot of people that drink, they get this impression that you meet somebody who's sober and all they're going to do is tell you how amazing it is to be sober and how much better it is. And obviously it is. But, if you just lead with that, you tend not to win too many friends and influence too many people. So I always try and minimize it and make it sound like it's not really a big thing, because if they don't think it's a big thing, then it's not going to be a big thing. So that's why I like, honestly, write it down, get it tattooed somewhere. No thanks, I'm not drinking at the moment, and it seems to be working out for me. It's great. As I say, it is probably the exact opposite of what you actually believe. You may well, and I know, again, there are always two camps on this. There are the people that do it one day at a time, and the people that never, that say they're not drinking forever. But honestly, if you do one day at a time for a couple of years, it's like you're never going to drink again, are you? It's the same thing. Anyway, so it's probably a little bit different to what you actually believe. You probably are never going to drink again. You probably believe that, and you probably believe that it's the best thing you've ever done, and that you'd be dead if you continued to drink, and like all of that sort of stuff. So that's what you believe and what you feel, but you don't necessarily have to say that. You don't have to lead with that. What you find is if you take this more gentle approach, more people start asking about it, and you get more interest that way. If you go out in a very hostile way, you tend to just turn everybody off, and then you just end up standing in the corner on your own. Your wife won't even talk to you anymore. Not saying that happens to me a lot, but you know. So anyway, those are my sort of tips for that initial bit. Just minimize it and try not to knock up against their ego. Of course, that doesn't always work. Sometimes you get the little bit of a follow-up. Oh, go on, you can have a drink. Now, for that, I deploy one of my favorite sort of techniques, which I like to call the compliment and change. So let's say Dave, I've given him the, oh, I'm not drinking at the moment, mate, and it seems to be working out well for me. He's like, oh, go on. It's summer. It's sunny. Have a beer. Everyone's having a beer. Go on. At this point, I do the compliment and change, which means I compliment him. So I go, oh, Dave, I'm really glad you're here because you know a lot about water polo, don't you? Now, Dave doesn't know water polo from anything else, but I've just complimented him. So he's going, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm the world's leading authority on water polo. And then you change the subject and you say, well, who do you fancy in the Olympics? Who do you think's gonna win? And of course, Dave will then spend the next 20 minutes talking about Germany's chances of winning the Olympic water polo tournament, accepting the fact that Germany aren't actually in it because they didn't qualify this year. But Dave, the instant expert, will be telling you all about what a great team they've got. So, he has long since forgotten that he was trying to get you to have a beer because now he's talking about his favorite subject. And of course, if you actually do it, that's something he knows about, then, it's generally more effective. I've just, my mind's gone into one of those groups about water polo, hasn't it? So, yeah, give him a compliment, say, you're really good at this. Can you help me with that? And change the subject, the compliment and change. And of course, if the compliment and change doesn't work, then you go to the last resort, the sort of nuclear option, which is just walking away. If anybody's giving you a hard time because you won't drink alcohol, you don't need to be in that situation. You just walk away. You don't even need to think of an excuse. I'll give you 3 right now. 1, you need the loo. 2, your phone's ringing. 3, you need to go and stand over there. You'll find a way to extricate yourself from that conversation. So just walk away. And that leads me to, another point. Leisha, a good friend of mine, she always talks about curating your friendship group. When you stop drinking, sometimes you do need to curate. And, it might be a temporary thing. It might be a permanent thing. For me, there were a few permanent people that I just totally and utterly stopped talking to. I've literally never spoken to them after stopping drinking. And there are a few people who I just was a bit more careful about. I didn't spend as much time with them, and I was more careful about the situations that I put myself in with them, just to make life a little bit easier for me. So those are really kind of, the things that you can do. 1, get yourself something that looks like a drink, so you're getting a little bit less pressure. 2, remember that people are coming from this point of ego, so try not to bruise it. Try not to push too hard against them. Just say, oh, I'm not drinking at the moment. It seems to be working out for me. If that doesn't work, compliment them, get them on their favorite subject. They will forget what you were talking about. And if that doesn't work, walk away, possibly even curating your friendship group a little bit. So all I would say about that is, it might actually be worth spending a bit of time planning that and really getting to grips with it, making sure that you know what you're going to say, you're confident with how you're going to say it. Even like practice it, say it out loud a few times. Again, all of those same methods apply. You know, if you're very reflective, you can probably do that in the shower. If you need a bit of help, maybe try journaling, get some paper, you know, just plan it out. And if you've got a good friend, if you're particularly sociable, talk to somebody. Again, you know, if you have the benefit of a coach or a mentor or a sponsor or somebody like that who can help you, absolutely, you know, talk it through with them. So yeah, think about what you're going to say, practice it, have an idea of what you're going to do if you're pushed, and you know, maybe even think about people who you should not spend too much time around just whilst you're getting everything kind of you know, under control. So that is pretty much everything that I've got to say this evening. What I just want to kind of wrap up, just reminding you that, in my humble opinion, you know, what I have seen so many times work is, you know, getting to grips with what you believe around alcohol. It makes such a difference. If you can do that, then you know you start to see it for what it really is. You start to believe stuff that is actually true, and that means there's very little things that there's nothing, you know. Once you if you stop believing that alcohol is doing anything for you, there's nothing really on earth that will make you drink alcohol, because you don't believe it's going to benefit you in any way. So I always think that's the starting point. The thought management stuff is really useful, and it can really help you to change the way you think around alcohol. I mean, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but you know what? You can use it to change the way you think about a lot of other things. That tactical change system is actually very flexible. I've used it to build exercise regimes. I've used it to change the way I, you know, react to drivers. I spend too much time on the M25, but you know, I'm a much happier person after I use the tactical change system to come up with a new way of reacting. So, you know, managing your thoughts. I personally, I think that sobriety is a great springboard to use that into other areas of your life. And then, of course, you know, having a real clear, detailed plan about how you're going to respond to other people. Once you've worked out how to say no to yourself, work out how to say no to other people. So, yeah, you know, I mean, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about this evening. I mean, I just want to leave you with the basic idea that summer's one of the greatest times of year, isn't it? You know, the sun is out, you, everything just like feels a little bit better. So don't hide away, you know, you like, don't crawl under the duvet. Go out and live your life. And you know, if you get invited to a wedding, think about it, prepare for it, because nothing makes a great party like a bit of planning, Duncan. But go out and enjoy yourself and realize that what is actually important about situations like that, it's the people, it's the food, it's the dancing, you know, it's the music, it's the entertainment, it's the venue, it's the nice clothes you wear. Honestly, alcohol never had anything to do with it. So, you know, you realize that you can genuinely go and enjoy your life a whole lot more. So I'm going to hang around and answer any questions in a second. Just before, I mean, if you want to disappear, shoot off. But just before I do answer any questions, I want to just talk very briefly about one of the programs that we do. So we do help people to stop drinking, but we also help people go from that stopping phase either into that stabilization phase using a lot of the stuff that I've already talked about, or even going beyond stabilization into the success phase. So we got some coaching programs that are specifically designed to help people with that. If you're interested, I am just going to flash up a QR code. You can, of course, scan that QR code and that will take you to my diary, and you can just book a session with me. No obligation at all. If you want to talk about any of the stuff that we've talked about today, I'm more than happy to jump on a call and talk to you about that. If you want a bit more detail about the programs that we offer, you know, again, more than happy to talk about that. We are kind of limited on the amount of people that we take because unfortunately there are only 24 hours in the day. We do have a couple of spaces available at the moment, but we don't have a huge amount of capacity. So once they are filled, they are filled. So yeah, scan the QR code. book a conversation. Let's have a chat. So that is genuinely everything I have got for you this evening. If you've got any questions, whack them in the chat, unmute, whatever. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful summer, and don't forget, you look amazing in your sunglasses.
Great stuff. Thanks, Duncan. And just one question. I'm going to keep it brief, right? I'm coming up to 200 days. I know that seems like in 2 days. And the one thing I've noticed, it's not hard for me to go to a party and not drink, but it's hard to stay in conversations because the level of conversation drops. And it means I tend to leave the party early now. And then people go like, why is he leaving so early? So it's like there's still a bit of work to be done to maybe stay and find a way to stay, that kind of way. It's hard to stay sometimes. That's all.
So I know exactly what you mean. I was at a party last year, and it was in Stratford, which is about an hour from where I live. So I was like, well, I'm not going to stay over. I'll just drive home because I'm going to be sober anyway. So there was kind of a little bit of a sort of, well, I don't really want to leave much later than 11:30 because it's getting late and all of that. But that particular group of friends, a couple of them are starting to waver, but mostly they still drink very heavily. Some of them still take drugs, like they're 25 years younger and don't have families and stuff like that. So I know those parties. Like, I used to go to those parties an awful lot, and they go south. They always go south about 11 o'clock. So I was like, 11 o'clock, yeah. Look at my watch, yeah. Notice the conversation starts to fizzle out a little bit. People start repeating themselves. They get a bit boring. Voices get slurred. I went, right, see you later, everybody. I'm off. Went home. Next morning, one of my friends called me up and said, do you know what, Duncan? I really wish I left when you did.
Yeah,
and it's I honestly, I don't think you can change that. I just think you kind of like take it for what it is. When people stop making sense, leave. That being said, there is another group of people where I actually assumed that they all drank as heavily as I did. And I always assumed that come midnight, everybody was just going to be driveling idiots. And the first time I went to one of those parties sober, I was quite surprised. It wasn't just me. There were other people who were drinking heavily, but it wasn't everyone. There were a few people who were like, they were holding on to that beer. They were making it last, and they were actually quite sober around about midnight. And it was quite interesting because it's like, wow, this is really good. There are people I can actually genuinely talk to. So some of the time, it's just like understanding where you are and just saying, right, that's it. I'm going to leave when it gets to X o'clock. And sometimes it's about hunting them out. I'd started, I got quite friendly with a few people that I'd hardly spoken to when I was a drinker.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I get it. I made a mistake. I said to someone once, and he's a good friend of mine, who was on a sport beer, not a large beers, right? But he was on a sport beer, and I was on my second, whatever I was, water or whatever I was drinking. And I told him, that's the third time you told me this story in 30 minutes. And he got offended, right? So it's funny. It's actually funny to think that was me, right? Like a year ago. Really funny.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of my flaws in life, I suppose. But I can genuinely believe people are idiots for believing something that I believed about 2 weeks ago.
No, I know. But I like your system. I like the system. So thanks for sharing them, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.